Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this week's class. Our lesson today is Total War and Armistice in World War One. Basically, this is the same lesson that we have been discussing last week. So this is textbook chapter 14, section number 3. You can reach to this lesson at your textbook page number 469 to 471. These pages are what that we did not finish last week. So let's move on to the objective slide. Objectives that we have already discussed, that you must be able to describe how the World War One became a total war, explain the effect that years of warfare had on morale of the soldiers and morale of the public, analyze the causes and effects of American entry into the war, and summarize the events that led to the end of the World War One. So these are the objectives. Let's move on to the lesson from where we left last week. This is the slide that we were discussing last week, that the total war was initiated. The strategy of total war actually was for the sake of ending the war, because they wanted to finish the war, and to end the war they needed to channelize all their possible sources, all their possible energies, in order to get a final result. So what did they do? For example, they brought conscription. All the young men were forced to fight. They could not refuse, and men, they were brought to the battlefronts, while the women, they were employed in the war industries like manufacturing. They were brought into nursing department. Even they were helping the soldiers in the battlefront as doctors or nurses. They were employed in the farming, and they worked in the armed forces in administrative jobs like decoding the messages or intelligence gathering, communication, so many things. So basically the jobs of these women actually convinced the governments of the world that they should be given equal status like the men, and the status of the citizen, and they should have the right, particularly the right of vote, which they got after the World War One. So let's move on to the today's topic. We discussed this slide last week. So in 1917, actually, the fighting nations, they were having high casualty rates. So soldiers, actually, they had a very poor morale. Their morale was getting low and low because of the non-availability of resources, harsh conditions on the battlefront. As a result, so many soldiers, they started to revolt or mutiny. They started to desert the forces. They started to leave from the battlefront. So at the same time, the public started to pressurize the governments to make step for the peace. But in these circumstances, because the countries had already initiated the policy of total war, so war was actually near ending. So desperations and frustrations were coming on the surface. Russia, for example, protests, the public protests, they started a revolution which ultimately brought down the monarchy. Tsar was executed, or you can say killed, and Bolsheviks, they took over the power. The Bolsheviks, first of all, the first step they do was that they made peace with with Germany. So they made an early exit from the war. The Russian exit from the war mean that now Germany could focus alone on the Western Front. Now the Britain and France, they were facing Germany altogether, because now Germany was not focused at all, or now Germany's power was not diverted into two fronts. So Russia's withdrawal meant that Germany now had only one side of the enemy. At the same time, Germans, they started to use their submarines on an extensive level. One of the big disaster or big incident that actually became a turning point was the destruction of the British merchant ship Lusitania. Basically, in this merchant ship, some 1,200 passengers were killed. That included 128 Americans. This was a sufficient excuse for Americans to pressurize Germany either to stop or either to pay the penalties. So, American President Woodrow Wilson actually threatened to cut off the diplomatic relations with Germany, which was actually a big diplomatic shock to the Germans. Basically, cutting off the diplomatic relations mean that there are much more possibilities that America will jump into the war from the other side. So that was one of the alarming situation for Germans. For the time being, they agreed that um, now onwards that they will attack the ships, but first they will give them warning, allowing the passengers from neutral countries to get off from the ship, and then they will attack the ship. Basically, Britain and France, they were using convoys to protect their merchant ships, and in return they were confiscating the trade items of the Germany in the name of contraband materials. But Germany then responded by using U-boats or submarines to attack their merchant convoys. So this was a game of cat and rat. So ultimately it continued until it eventually created a situation where America was forced to think to join the war. But later on, the reason to join the reason to join the war for America was not the submarine attacks, but German effort to you can say force Mexico to jump into the war by provoking a war against America. This is a story that is coming in next slides. So this is what I have been discussing, that international law actually allowed the confiscation of contraband material. The contraband material is any material which can be used for the war effort, and this contraband items are not included the food supplies. But Britain actually started to confiscate all the materials that were coming, or you can say coming out of Germany or going to Germany. So German merchant navy was actually under huge pressure. They were unable to arrange the supplies that were badly needed to feed the public as well as to maintain the military production. So as a result of this British steps, Germans they responded to use their submarines without any formal procedure, which they agreed before with the Americans, that they will give allowance for the neutral passengers to get off the ships. So by this way, they started to use the submarines to sink all the ships that were bringing goods to Britain or France. So this is the map, that the red dots, all of them, they show the destruction of ships. You can see that how much German submarines they brought havoc, or you can say catastrophe, to the merchant ships that were moving through the oceans. Um, so these attacks were actually sufficient to create a sympathy among the masses within America. So America was ultimately forced to join the war from the British side. Why? Because they had cultural ties with the British and France. At the same time, as I just discussed before, that Germany tried to provoke America by what? By trying to convince Mexico to attack America in return, that they will help them to recover the lands from America that once were part of the Mexican kingdoms. So this was a sufficient excuse. Basically, that was a telegram which the German foreign minister was sending to his ambassador in Mexico to convince the Mexican government. That telegram was decoded, intercepted by the British radio frequencies, and ultimately they delivered this telegram to America. For that reason, this was a sufficient excuse for America to jump into the war. As a result, America joined the war in the coming times. So in April 1917, American President Woodrow Wilson actually they asked the Congress to declare war on Germany. But still, America needed plenty of time to prepare for the war. It took them a long time to recruit the soldiers, to arrange the supplies, to transport them to European battlegrounds. So still, Germany, they had plenty of time to prepare themselves for the American entry into the war. But America's entry actually was a turning point for the war, because they were completely fresh, a very economically stable country. Their technological level was much more advanced than the other countries. So once the Americans they joined the war, actually it swing back the scale of war into the favor of allies. So before the Americans actually arrived on the battlefronts, Germany they tried their one last effort to push back the allies from the Western Front so that they should have sufficient ground to defend themselves. But this actually last effort actually exhausted German firepower and too much energy. By 1918, actually, around 2 million American soldiers they were already on the battlefront, and they were helping allies, the British and the French soldiers, to recover the lands that were taken by the Germans. So once the America joined the war, that was, as I discussed, as I told before, that it was a turning point. So Americans, although they fought very little in the war, but it was a morale boost, a kind of morale boost in the sense that a fresh army, highly equipped, highly trained, has joined the Allies because once the Russia they left the war, now Germany was focusing entirely on the Western Front. So American entry into the war gave Allies a huge morale boost. So German generals actually ultimately realized that now the victory in the war is not possible. So they actually informed the German king that now it is the time to make peace. As a result, German king resigned from the job, or you can say resigned from the power, and he escaped to the Netherlands. At the same time, another member of the group, Austria-Hungary, the monarchy collapsed due to the public pressure, and it actually, as it was a combination of, we discussed earlier on that it was a dual monarchy, so two countries were actually ruled by one person. So once there was public pressure, monarchy collapsed. Ultimately, at the end of the war, you will see that Austria and Hungary they were separated into two separate countries. At the same time, other members of the group, for example, Bulgaria and Ottoman Empire, they demanded for the peace. So war was actually, with the arrival of Americans, war was now eventually coming to its near close. It was slowly and gradually stepping towards a final settlement. So as a result, on November 11, 1918, Germans they officially surrendered, or you can say they declared the ceasefire. So this was the official end of the World War One. After the war, actually now for America there was a huge task how to rebuild or how to bring the peace back into the Europe. So American President Woodrow Wilson he extended his 14-point peace formula. This major points of this peace formula included actually that freedom of oceans, the navigation should be free. No country has the right to stop any merchant ship in open sea as long as this water is not a territorial water of a country. So no country can attack, no country can stop any country from conducting trade through the oceans. Free trade means that countries should be allowed to sell and purchase as much they want from any country, because if the countries will try to create barriers for the trade, it will create rivalry, it will create tension. So this was one of the point of the peace formula. Similarly, American president asked for reduction of arms so that no country should be too much strong and to be in the position that it can initiate a war. When a country is not strong enough militarily, definitely the planners, the policymakers, they will think again and again in favor of war to start or not. And similarly, as we discussed, the alliance system was one of the major cause of the war. So American president also offered the formula with a term that says that there should be an end to the secret treaties among the countries, which actually allowed them to be feeling safe and secure and ultimately jumping into the war. And some nations they were given the right of self-determination, particularly Balkan. So the country of Yugoslavia was created as a result of this self-determination idea. And similarly, the League of Nations was created in order to settle the disputes on table and to avoid the future war. So this is all the effort that was about the Woodrow Wilson that he extended for bringing peace into Europe and to avoid the future war. But we will see that within 20 years, Europe plunged into another big war, the World War II. Why this happened, it is a different story which we will discuss into the other lessons. Until that time, until next week, see you.